Very welcome to Football Republic's audience with Bill O Herlihy in association with Ballyfermot College. Our guest this evening has covered 10 Olympic Games, numerous European and World Cups, a successful journalist and an even more successful businessman with his company O Herlihy Communications. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll welcome our guest for this evening, broadcasting legend Bill O Herlihy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Bill. It's great to have you.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
I suppose, firstly, most people know you from your RTE coverage, but little people mightn't know that you never really even wanted to come to Dublin in the first place. Never mind RTE. You're a tribal Cork man.
I am indeed. Yeah.
What was it like growing up in Cork?
Well, it was very different to today. Obviously, you know. I mean, growing up in Cork. Believe it or not, that's the thick edge of 70 years ago, as far as I'm concerned. Like, Cork was a very small city.
Like all good Cork men, though, they'll never forget Cork. Like,
no,
so.
No. Well, I have two girls, Jill and Sally, and they cannot understand how I'm still so associated with Cork and so much of a tribal Cork man when I've spent far more time in Dublin than ever in Cork.
Big family? How many was in your family growing up?
Six kids.
And what order were you in that?
I was the eldest. I was
the
eldest. I'm spoiled according to...
spoiled, or were you the boss?
Well, I wasn't the boss. I had a very tough mum and dad, but I was told I was spoiled, but I never believed I was.
Something I noticed when I was reading your book, that religion seemed to play a huge part in your life growing up.
Well, I mean, in those days, religion was a very big part of everybody's life in Cork City anyway. I mean, there was confraternities, novenas, mass on a regular basis, the rosary every night. That was normal, you know, so I inherited all that and I maintained it ever since.
Was there a whistle to call you for the rosary?
That's right, yeah. We, like in the old days in Cork, unlike today, you could play football in the streets, which we did. And my father had a very distinctive whistle. And when he'd whistle, we'd know, okay, it's time for the rosary, so we'd have to stop the match, say the rosary and go back out again. No, like, that's unbelievable by today's standards.
So school, somebody who aspired to be a journalism and went on to work in journalism, was school a major part? Was it forced upon you, or not forced upon you, but was that importance of school, you know, there from day one?
Oh well, obviously. I mean, the two things I remember from school was when I was in national school. We had a teacher in high infants called Miss Murphy, and I was a left-hander, a natural left-hander, and she told me I couldn't write. Yeah, I couldn't write with my left hand, so my left hand was tied behind my back, and I was made write with my right. Now, there was never any question of cruelty. Like, the woman, that was the last thing in her mind. She just said, "You cannot write with your left hand." No, that's a different thing entirely. And I went to Ferris, which was a minor diocesan seminary. If you wanted to be a priest, you had to go to Ferris, St. Finbarr's College. Now, I had no intention of becoming a priest, but my brother became a priest, and some of his, my cousin became a priest, so we all went to Ferris. And there was a teacher there called Dr. Connolly, and he was a sadist.
I want to ask you about him already.
Yeah, a sadist is the only way to describe him. But he was the only guy that was offside, let me put it that way.
Why do you describe him as being offside?
Because he never wanted to teach. That was the obvious thing, and he hated every minute he was in Ferris, and he took it out on us. And we used, believe it or not, because of the nature of the place, because it was the minor diocesan seminary, we had to learn Greek as well as Latin. And the very first class we had every morning was Greek. And he used to ask us, and he was very threatening, like he'd say, if you didn't know whatever, you'd be punished, and he'd let you know in advance. And we did the Greek numerals this particular day, and he said to me, he said, "Now lads," he said, not to me, he said to us, that whatever numeral you'll miss, you'll be punished by that number of slaps. So I missed 47. No, I have no idea what 47 is to this day, but I'll never forget the reaction. And that was 47 across the face. No, he didn't give me 47, but he started to give me an awful lot of like that. I was 1, and I think he stopped at about 15 or 16, at which stage I was.
Yeah, it's a lasting impression.
He should have been in jail. If he did that today, he'd be in jail.
Was there pressure on you to in school then, just because from your family, was the school the be all and end all from the home?
Well, it was necessary. I think the feeling was that if you wanted to get a decent job, you had to get a decent education and a decent exam at the end of it. I never did my leaving, because when I was growing up, and again it's different today, the toughest exam by far was the matric. That was the one that allowed you to go to college. And the questions were much tougher. The exam was far tougher exam than the leaving. So I did my matric, and when I did my matric, I had at that stage decided I wanted to be a journalist, because it was in the genes. My dad wasn't a journalist, he was in local government, but his father and a number of his uncles were journalists, so it kind of came out in me, having missed a generation. So I said to him, I wanted to be, and of course being a journalist I wanted to join the Examiner. There was no alternative really at that stage.
Big Cork paper.
Yeah. So he brought me down to meet the chairman, Tom Crosby, who was a very decent man. And I remember the interview lasted about, maybe, it wasn't an interview at all, the conversation between himself, my father, and Tom Crosby lasted about maybe 20 minutes. And it finished up as follows. He said, your uncle, your grandfather, Willie, as he called him, was a really good journalist, he said. And he said, I think, he said, that Annie O Herlihy is good enough for the Examiner, he said.
That's as good as you can get.
And he said, when we have a job, you can have it. So I went away delighted with myself, but it wasn't an immediate. He made it very clear it wouldn't be immediate. And about 10 weeks maybe before the leaving, because I did my matric at 15, and then the leaving was the next exam the following year. And just about 10 weeks before, or maybe slightly less than that before the leaving, a letter arrives in that there was a job in the reading room with the Cork Examiner. If I wanted it, I could have it, but I had to let them know because it started Monday week.
Can you explain just what the reading room was, actually?
Well, in those days, it wasn't like today. It wasn't electronic printing or anything. It was actually lead printing, you know, with lead, and it would go down. What the reporters would write would go down to the printers. It would be set in lead, copied, go back to the reading room to make sure that there were no mistakes in it, and the mistakes would be corrected and sent back to the printers for correction, and then go into the paper. It was a kind of a very old-fashioned process, which is long, long since dead. But there was a guy called Paddy Kelly, who was a very good journalist and a very interesting writer. And I remember having a row with a fellow who was a senior reader, as he was called at the time, because Paddy Kelly was talking about the Antarctic, and he described it as follows. He said, miles and miles of nothing but miles and miles. And the reader said, oh, that has to be a mistake. I said, what do you mean? He said, he meant miles and miles of nothing. No, he said, I said he did not. He meant miles and miles of nothing but miles and miles, which is a far more graphic description. So we had a huge row about it, but I lost because I was only a junior, and he cut out the elder part.
You said was it 10 weeks for your leaving? How did not doing that leaving sit?
Well, done very badly with my mum, I can tell you, because she couldn't see any reason to go into the Examiner and not do your leave. I suspect she felt, you know, that really that being a journalist was only a phase in my life, and that I'd go into the bank or something like that, you know, or I'd do something a lot more respectable. Yeah.
It didn't. Oh, you didn't like remain in the reading room. You ended up in sales for a while.
I was 8 months in the reading room, and then I was transferred to the commercial department, and I used to be involved in the sales of the Echo, the evening paper. The evening Echo was desperate. I hated every minute of it. I was there for about 2 months. And I had to deal with a fellow called Johnny O'Mahony, who ran the whole shebang. Like he sold every single Echo in Cork City, and I had to deal with him. He was actually okay, you know, but I mean, it wasn't my scene at all. I was having desperate trouble making sure that the money was correct and all this kind of stuff.
It's not journalism that
it wasn't exactly what I wanted. But after about 2 months, I was transferred up to the editorial, and it became a sub-editor. I was obviously by far and away the youngest sub-editor. I was about 16 and a half, 17 maybe at that stage, yeah.
How did you manage to get up that ladder? So
I happened to be in the right place. All my life I happened to be in the right place at the right time, and I just happened to be there again.
There was you almost gave up journalism for a law degree.
Well, I did in theory, but not in practice. Because I'll tell you, I had a terrible concern that I was going to be stuck forever as a sub-editor. And I wanted to be a reporter. I wanted to be on the road. I wanted to do my thing. And I said to myself, at one stage, because I didn't go to college, like you'd find this very strange now, but when I did my matric, you had to be 18 before you were allowed to go to college. So I had got a couple of years before I could go to college. The fact that I qualified to go to college didn't come into it. I was too young. But I said to myself, I fancy doing a law degree, because I kind of fancied myself pouncing around in the courts and doing that. But I said to myself, if I do a law degree, you know, I'll be stuck in this place forever. So I decided against it. So I then luckily again I was transferred down
to the newsroom, wasn't it?
To the newsroom, yeah.
That's where you want. That's
where I wanted to be.
That's journalism in your age at the time.
Yeah.
And what was the newsroom then? it was just chasing down stories, getting
Chasing
your copy?
down stories, and I was on, for instance, I remember I was on Night Town, as they called it, where you had fellas phoning in from all over Munster, really, more sometimes from Dublin. But I was there the night that Nelson Pillar was blown up.
Big story for...
Yeah, it was a huge story, and I was, you know, you take that in from the guy, and you write it yourself. I was dealing with whoever the reporter, I can't remember who the reporter was, but he was from the Dublin office of the Examiner, and that was a major story. That was obviously the headline story of the day. But generally speaking, I covered the courts. I did sport, because there was sport and news were mixed. I did a couple of murders, all kinds of things. Like there was not like whatever was there, and if you happened to be in the right place at the right time, you were just sent on the job, and that was it. One of the jobs I was very disappointed that I didn't get to do properly, although I was congratulated, if I may be so arrogant about the way I wrote it. I was sent out to Cork Airport to meet Charlie Chaplin, but they got the time of the flight wrong, and Charlie was gone. He was gone down to Kerry, and I'd love to have met him. But I did this story about how we missed him and all that, and it went down okay.
As you said, the newsroom led to a bit of sports reporting. This was your first experience with sports reporting? There's a story I want to ask you about your first reporting job in Dalymount Park, and the tribal Cork man coming up to to cover the soccer in Dublin.
Yeah, to find that I was at the very back of the press box.
Yeah, how did that go down?
And I looked and I said to myself, what the hell? I was with a whole series of freelance fellas sometimes from the local papers in different parts of the country, and all the daily papers are down the front except me. So I said that wasn't good enough for the Examiner. So Joe Wickham was the General Secretary of the FAI at the time, and a very decent fella. So I said to Joe, this is not going to be where the Examiner is going to be. We're down in the front like everybody else. And he said, fine, no problem.
No problems after that.
Obviously, my predecessor didn't push it too hard.
It was a busy time on all fronts because you were dabbling in radio a little at that time as well.
I was, like, my broadcasting was a fluke. And I remember when I was asked to do some radio work, because Bill Toomey was the manager of the Cork Opera House, and he worked on a programme called Junior Sports Magazine. And Junior Sports Magazine, Jimmy McGee cut his eye teeth in Junior Sports Magazine with Harry Tullier. Harry was the anchor. And they did all kinds of things, you know. So Bill Toomey was a rugby buff, and he was invited with Joe Linnane to do the radio commentaries. I don't know, was there ever television in those days in the rugby at all, but certainly the radio commentaries, which took him out of Cork for the, what was it, in the Five Nations or whatever the hell it was at the time. So he was missing maybe 5 Saturdays. So I was asked to fill in. And it would be hockey matches and Mickey Mouse GA matches, like very small stuff. And I cut my eye teeth on that, and I enjoyed it immensely. And when he came back then, they asked me to stay on. So they extended the coverage out of Cork to further trivialise the broadcast. And
was it because of the radio that you subsequently led into TV?
Yeah.
And
well, what you have to remember that I was, as I said myself, I was the one-eyed man in the Valley of the Blind, because television was only just had only just come in. That was 65, and television came in 61, and there was nobody in Cork with any serious interest in or serious background in television. There was a guy called Paddy McCarthy who worked in the Independent in Cork, and he came from New Hartford in Connecticut, and he had done some television broadcasting. So when Frank Hall decided to do a programme on the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Lusitania off Kinsale, he wanted Paddy to do what they call a scene set at the old head, like behind me kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And that was that thing. And then he wanted somebody to do an interview with the survivor. And there was nobody except me with any experience of anything. So I said no the first day, I said no the second day, and eventually on the third day I said, okay, I'll do it, provided it's not used if it's bad. And I thought it was atrocious.
You stopped it halfway through and was like, this is...
But the woman was senile, the God love her, you know, and to do an interview was tortuous. So I did it, and for some strange reason I'm forever grateful. Frank Hall saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and he gave an instruction that I was to do all the work on Newsbeat out of Cork.
Looking back on that, it was a big moment.
Oh, it was huge. It was huge. And like, I was amazed. And to be honest about it, it sounds ridiculous now, but I didn't care really. I had no interest. My ambition was to be the editor of the Cork Examiner. I had no interest whatever in radio or television as a career. But given the fact that he asked me to do it, I said, okay, I'll try it anyway. And I spoke to the Examiner about it, and they had no problems, provided I did it on my own time and provided I didn't exclusively give Frank stories that should have gone to the Examiner. So we came to a very satisfactory arrangement for both, and I started to work then.
So you had the Examiner and you had Newsbeat and you also had the radio. That's a lot of pressure. And
not when you're young, I was delighted. The more pressure I got, the better it was. But I tell you where the pressure came. The pressure came because when we used to go in, when Joe McCarthy, with whom I worked, he was the cameraman and director as well, let's be honest about it. When we used to go into a town, we'd stop the traffic. You couldn't imagine now, like, this is 65, 66, 67. Like, it was so new. You'd be doing an interview maybe I can remember one particular one in Thurles. And there must have been about 600 or 700 people watching our work and commenting, like, he's very small, isn't he? He doesn't...
build your confidence up anyway.
He's not a bit good looking or anything like that. I don't know how he gets on television. All comments like that would be very personal, you know. So instead of kind of expanding and becoming a kind of a real gobshite, I actually, I contracted. And I became far more conscious or self-conscious than I ever was before. So it did me, in some ways, a lot of harm. And of course, in most ways, did me a lot of good.
What happened if there was no story? Because from what I can understand from reading on Newsbeat, it was feature pieces, you'd go around the country. But if there was no story, what happened then?
There was always a story.
There's always a story.
See, if I was to reflect on my career, I was the luckiest man of all, because I was the first regional reporter for RTE, and I was based in Cork. There had been no, apart from Frank Hall working with Cathal O'Shannon, going out on stories from Dublin, there had been no concentration at all on regional Ireland. So there was a whole series, hundreds and hundreds of undiscovered stories. But you also had to you had to excite Frank, because they had to be a bit offbeat and kinky, like, and Frank was interested in something that wasn't just a straightforward, hard news story. But we had hundreds of stories, like they emerged out of everywhere. And there was a friend of mine called Liam Kelly, who was sent down by the Daily Mirror to expand the coverage out of Munster, and he was based in Cork. He came up with piles of stories that we actually used as well, you know, and we got lots and lots of coverage. And then RTE began to look at the whole question of regional coverage, because they could see that Frank Hall's programme, which I suppose to some extent is replicated by what Mary Kennedy does today and nationwide, but that was the very first time that rural Ireland was exposed. And we were in the forefront of that, which was a very privileged position to be in.
You used the word kinky there. Could you tell
I
the
don't
audience?
mean kinky in the sense,
But I mean,
oddball, odd beat.
Speaking of the word kinky, though, if you could explain to the audience who Jane Mansfield was. In reading your book, it's an interesting story with a sad ending, unfortunately.
Yeah, for her, yeah. Jane Mansfield was Marilyn Monroe light, really, and she never quite made it. But she was very sexy. She had huge boobs. She was like.
There was a big fuss made about her coming to Ireland.
There was. She came to she had a show, a one-woman show, that toured, and she was in the UK, and she got a contract to come to the Brandon Hotel in Tralee to do a show there, which caused consternation in Kerry, because the bishop and the priests, everybody, the community were saying this was awful. This is a woman, a very sexy woman. This was a sensual show. Now, nobody had seen the show. Not a single person knew what the show was about, except they looked at her and they said, she's an occasion of sin. That was actually used. She was an occasion of sin. The poor woman didn't know what hit her when she came to Kerry.
She was a Catholic.
She was. Yeah. She made it very clear. She said, I'm a Catholic, she said. And my show is a very clean show. There's no problem whatsoever. But at that stage, there was an overwhelming opposition to it, so it was cancelled. But Frank Hall sent me down to do an interview with her, and when I got there, the show actually was cancelled. But she did a press conference. And I remember she walked into the press conference. She was a tall lady with big, as I said, you know what, and she had 2 Chihuahua dogs. And she walked into the room, and she stood up, and they were there, and she looked around at everybody, and everybody went.
Couldn't believe it.
We'd never seen anything like it. But I was in the awful position then. I was the only. There was only one television crew. That was the RTE crew, the Newsbeat crew, and they told me I was to run the press conference. I was to ask the questions and all that. And there were some real hard-nosed Fleet Street guys behind me. And as a young fella, I was mortified doing the question, but it worked out okay.
So you were
still. It's come back to haunt me, mind you, because I've seen it on.
I've seen it myself.
Years and all that kind of stuff.
It was around this time. You were obviously still in the Examiner and Newsbeat, but you got a call from RTE. Come on full time pretty soon afterwards.
I got a call from Jack White, who was the controller of programs, and he asked me would I like to join on a full-time basis for 1 year contract. My mother, I nearly had another heart attack, God love her, when she said, you're giving up the Examiner for 1 year on television. And I kind of said to myself, I don't know whether I can make it or not, but I'm going to try. And I went into George Crosby and asked for leave of absence, and George said no. And I was amazed. I said, look, I've done whatever it was, 12 years or something in the Examiner, and surely at this stage you won't have any problem about leave of absence. And he said, listen, anybody who ever got leave of absence from the Examiner never came back. So he said, I'm not giving a leave of absence, but if you want to come back in a year's time, come back and talk to me and we'll talk again.
Did you ever?
Of course, I never came back.
Did you ever think of turning down RTE? Did that enter your head?
Not at all. No.
As much as you
because
wanted to be
I had become something, I suppose, if I was being honest with myself, something of a kind of a television animal. And I think, you know, when I look back at George Lee and the fact that he gave up politics and went back into RTE, I think I think he had become a television animal without realising it himself, and you missed the kind of buzz. And I remember when I left RTE on a full-time basis after the money lent, after when I was in sport at this stage, I went in and started my own PR company. I remember looking out the window one day and saying to Hilary, my wife, I said, in God's name, what have I done? You know, because I hated it. And I missed television very badly. And again, I didn't realise that I'd become a television person. So I went into to Michael Garvey, who was the controller, and I said to him, look, I said, I think I made a big mistake. So we were talking about, he said, tell me who your clients are. And I told him. He said, are you out of your mind? He said, you have your own business, you have international clients. You're never going to be, he says to me, anything more than a down-the-line reporter in sport. So why on earth are you leaving? I said, I have to. And he said, okay. He said, a year from now, things always happen a year from now, as far as I can see. A year from now, you come back to me, and if you feel the same way, you can have your job back. So I never went back to him.
We'll return to your PR company in a while. But you went from Newsbeat then to 7 Days.
I did.
When did that contact come along?
That came along, I thought it was an accident, but Sean Casey, who was the Lord Mayor of Cork and is the Labour Party TD, died when he was Lord Mayor. And I was asked to do a political assessment of the situation in Cork and the possible by-election result, all that kind of stuff. And Joe McCarthy said to me, that is, you know, he said, that's a test, he said, for 7 Days, which was at that stage the #1 programme in the country, bigger than The Late Show. And I said, not at all, but in fact it was. So I did it, and my assessment had turned out to be correct, and I was asked if I joined the programme. So I made it clear I didn't want to leave Cork, and they made it clear to me, or Murish McAneil, the boss, made it clear to me that I was going to be based in Cork, because he said, like, what an idiot I was to believe him. He said, there's an airport in Cork, and I want you to go to Canada, I want you to go to the Middle East, I want you to go to Africa, so that's fine with us. So I said, this is fantastic. And then it comes to the 1st of September, and 7 Days has reorganised itself. Not on the air, they were supposed to, about 4 weeks before they went on the air, but they're getting themselves organised. And Seamus Smith, who was #2 in the programme, rang me and he said, Billy, are you with us or not? I said, I'm with you. But he said, what are you doing in Cork? I said, I'm based in Cork. He said, you are in your eye based in Cork. I tell you what you do now. He said, you'll go upstairs, you'll pack your suitcase, you'll kiss your mother goodbye, tell her you're going to a meeting at 10:30 tomorrow in Dublin, and you won't be back.
That was it.
And I had no alternative. I was absolutely in a fury, but I couldn't do anything about it. I had no other job.
When you left Newsbeat, did you leave in good terms?
No.
Yourself and Frank
no,
Hall,
Frank Hall was very good to me, and he felt I'd left him down very badly, because he was under the impression that I joined 7 Days having negotiated all through the summer to join them, which wasn't true at all. I didn't understand the mechanics of the way RTE operated, so I was asked to join. I said, Frank Hall must be told. He'll be told. But nothing ever happened. So the problems were in Dublin, and it took him about 4 or 5 years before he appreciated that. In fact, I was in the Gresham Hotel by chance, having lunch, and he was there by chance, and I was just walking out, having finished the lunch, and he put out his arm and he stopped me. He said, Bill O Herlihy, he said, we haven't talked for years. He said, it's about time we did. And we made up. And he understood. He told me I was very naive, but he thought before I was telling a lie, he now understood I was telling the truth, but I was being silly.
Obviously, you must have been delighted to be going to 7 Days. Did that take a little bit off it falling out with a close friend like that?
No, it didn't really. It didn't. To be honest, I was disappointed, but I mean, it was a different milieu entirely. And I didn't enjoy 7 days at the start because, unlike Newsbeat, where Joe McCarthy must have made all the decisions, these decisions were being imposed upon you know with a very definite measurement of how
The whole
well you were
environment
doing.
was different.
Oh, the environment. We were top of the ratings by a long way, for even way beyond Gay Byrne at that stage. Because, again, this is where it was fascinating from my point of view. When the government set up RTE, and Current Affairs was set up as well, they always saw RTE as an instrument of government in a way. They didn't see that there would be a forensic examination of government policy by RTE at Current Affairs.
So they would have. They weren't the biggest fans of 7 days, to say the least.
They were anything but. There was a huge tension between government and 7 days because of the way that 7 days approached things. Because Maurice McAneill was a fantastic editor, and you had wonderful presenters like David Thornley was in my judgment, in my experience, was the best ever Current Affairs broadcaster, anchorman. John O'Donoghue was there, Brian Farrell, Brian Cleese, Paddy, God, my head is gone. I'll call him just Paddy. And Ted Nealon. They were like, it was an unbelievable lineup of real top stars. And then you had myself and Rodney Rice and Dennis Mitchell. We were the kind of fellows who were sent out the country to do the stories out of Dublin. We didn't usually anchor the programmes at all, except occasionally. So it was an amazing experience to be part and parcel of that. But it was fraught with tension every single day because the government used to go berserk when they saw the way that government policies were being taken apart bit by essentially by Thornley, you know. And it came to a head when Fianna Fáil wanted to put in place a referendum, which in my estimation would have been the best thing that happened to us if it did happen. And that was that we would have the straight vote, that the multi-seat constituency would disappear and it'd be first past the post. And I think Ireland would have been a 10 times better place, and the Dáil would have been a far better place if that had happened. But David Thornley and Basil Chubb, who was Professor of Political Science in Trinity, and David was Associate Professor, they did a survey and that showed I can't remember, but I think the Dáil was either 122 or 133 seats. I can't remember, it was one or the other. Fianna Fáil would have had 109 seats in the first Dáil under the straight vote. That was the end. There was no way the people of Ireland were given any political party that kind of power. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Unfortunately, it landed on me, because I did a programme on illegal money lending in Dublin, which used hidden cameras, hidden microphones, caused a sensation because of what it revealed. And the government decided, like, this is it now, we'll go after 7 days, we'll curb them, or we'll go and take this programme on.
That wasn't just, them taking on that programme wasn't them just saying we're not in favour of this programme, or that there was a tribunal over that money lending.
Oh, there was. Funnily enough,
property
the whole
went
thing was, like, it's very important to recognise it was entirely politicised, because they originally wanted 3 judges of the Supreme Court to be involved in the tribunal, and they said no, under no circumstances. So then they got 3 High Court judges. One of them was the chairman, Butler was his name. He happened to be a director of elections for Fianna Fáil in Dundee Rathdown. They had the president of the High Court, or of the District Court, Mr. Justice Flynn, had a very serious row with 7 days the previous year. He was on the tribunal. And the third person was the first judge appointed after to the High Court after Bloody Sunday, who was a very decent guy. I can't remember his name offhand, but a very, very decent man he was. He was the only fellow who was fair to us. They changed the terms of reference, or the interpretation of the terms of reference, within 4 or 5 days. And I remember Ernest Wood saying, this is not a tribunal. He said, this is a witch hunt. And it was a witch hunt. Not against me. They couldn't give a damn about me. I just happened to be caught up in it. I was 5.5 days giving evidence. And I'll tell you one thing that always stuck in my mind. It was about day 3. I came back from lunch. And I was asked by Mr. Justice Butler, he said, Mr. Herlihy, I would like you to define the word classic. And I said, within the context of the script, my lord. Oh, no, he said, I want a precise definition. But I said, everything you've asked me so far has been in the context of the script, because the script was examined by the tribunal word by word, line by line. No, he says, I do not want it within the context of the script. I want a precise definition. I don't know what I said.
Were you shafted, do you think?
There's no question. He says, and he gets his Webster's dictionary, he says, classic Mr. O'Herlihy is the supreme example of the ordinary. And I do not understand, he said, how a reporter of your experience on a program of the stature of 7 days doesn't know every single word you use.
But why did the inquiry fall at the door of the program instead of the actual problem?
But sure, that's what we were amazed at. I mean, they had no interest in the problem, because the problem, everybody admitted the problem was very serious at the time, and probably is to a large extent in certain parts of Dublin as well. But they had no interest in the problem. They had interest in the program because they wanted to curb current affairs. That was their whole ambition, and they succeeded. Like, it was, I got one. I remember there was a reporter from the Cork Examiner who was the tribunal. He was a stenographer for the tribunal as well, and for every big thing that took place. And he almost had the stature and the of the judges in a sense. He was a very special person in all these big things. And when I finished and kind of staggered down after 5.5 days evidence, he stands up from his notes and walks over, and he says very loudly, so the judges could hear it, he said, Bill, he says, you have been a credit to journalism, which I thought was so important and so decent of him to do it, because I was battered at that stage. And from a person who was considered to be a terrific reporter on the first day, I was considered to be a total gobshite after 56 days.
Did that whole process just make you cynical towards?
Yeah, and I knew that I was only a pawn in the whole thing. Like, they weren't a bit interested in me, but they succeeded in curbing current affairs, and bit by bit, facilities were withdrawn and things like. Even though there was a very public demonstration by Tom Hardiman and his board. Tom Hardiman was a very decent fellow, I thought, but you know, the constant pressure told. And eventually, I remember we were at a meeting at which we complained about the fact that facilities were being constantly withdrawn. And Rodney Rice asked the question of the Director General. He said, DG, I hear that 7 days is coming off the air in the autumn schedule. Can you tell us anything about it? And McGuinness, who was the head of news, and no friend at all of 7 days, let me tell you, because of the problems it created for him. He said, I'll take that, he said, DG, and I want to say this, he said, 7 days is coming off the air, he said, in the autumn schedule. He said, a new current affairs programme is going in place. We don't know what it's going to be called. We don't know who's going to be in it, but I can tell you, Bill O Herlihy, he won't be in it. And you, Rodney, you won't be in it. And Dennis Mitchell won't be in it. Like, there was a kind of a stunned silence. That was like what happened to poor old Ronan O'Gara in his own way. There was a guy called Chris Darby who was a director and producer on the programme, and it's amazing how circumstances produce great heroes, to me anyway. And Chris Darby says, DG, I did my best work with Bill O Herlihy, Rodney Rice and Dennis Mitchell, and if they're not good enough for the programme, I won't work in it. And unbelievably, right around the room, every single person, because the whole team with one exception was present at the meeting, they all said they wouldn't work on the programme, on the new programme. So now, instead of just kind of transferring everybody with a different name in the programme, they suddenly had nobody. So there was a huge crisis. But it was very obvious that whatever happened, I wasn't going into current affairs. It was very obvious. Like,
Was that you finishing current affairs?
that was finished, yeah. And I mean, I recognise that. And I was asked, and I wouldn't go so far as it was a very definite ask, but there was a nibble from the Irish Times, would it be interested in joining them? And I was going to do it. So I went to see Oliver Maloney, he became Director General afterwards. He was the head of Human Resources, a very decent guy. He was with us all the way through the tribunal. He knew exactly what how the tribunal had tried to squash us and refused to allow lots of research to go forward to support our case. He said to me, he said, if you leave, people will misunderstand. He said, you have nothing to be ashamed of. The programme was accurate. He said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to go into sport.
How was the welcome in sport?
Well, Michael O'Hare was
the
the
legend
head.
that is.
Oh yeah, he was a very decent fellow to me, but he didn't want me at all. And he said, I went in. I went on the Monday. I joined the sports department. He was racing, and he was racing on Tuesday, and he was racing on Wednesday. And he came in on Thursday, and he said to me, he called me in. He said, Bill, he said, you're with us. He said, you're welcome, but I don't want you. That's exactly what I said. I don't want you, because he said, you have the wrong image for us. Sport is a soft environment. He
That's
said,
the tribunal following you.
yeah, oh,
almost
absolutely. You have a hard-nosed attitude, and I do not want you. But he said, you're here now. So I tell you this much, he says, you will not broadcast for a minimum of 6 months, because I want to leave the hard image die. I said, fine. I was just married, so I was quite happy to have a job, you know, and instead of being out on the road or even in the Irish Times. So I said, fine, that's grand.
How long did that sort of, I
And
won't say frosty, but how long did that?
Well,
perception-
for a
long did it
while.
last?
But let me finish the story first, because what happened was that was Thursday. No, sorry, that was Wednesday, excuse me. And on Thursday he calls me and he says, Seamus O'Ryan, Jim Ryan, who was the president of the GA, had started an organisation called Fail in the Gael, which was to develop juvenile hurling in Ireland. And he was coming to Dublin and he wanted a bit of publicity for his Fail in the Gael. So Mick said to me, I want you to go and do it. But I said, yesterday you told me I wouldn't broadcast for 6 months. That was yesterday, he said. You're doing it. And thereafter I did it. But people used to ring up and they say how sad it was that O'Herlihy was reading the racing results. But I couldn't give a damn. I was delighted.
You were happy just to...
I was, yeah. And in fairness to Michael O'Hare, it's very important to make this point. I was very well trained in 7 days. And indeed, I suppose, from the old days with Frank Hall as well. And I used to come up with loads of ideas for stories. And at that stage, like, the sports department was a very kind of predictable place. Everybody was lazy, really, because you knew exactly what you were going to do in September or October, even if it was only now March, you know. Everything was very predictable. So I was come up with lots of ideas for stories, most of which were used. And one day I was sitting at my desk and he came out and he said to me, very loudly, so everybody heard it. He said, and he knew the way I had retailed the story about You're Not Welcome, you know. So he said, Bill, he said, I didn't want you, he said, but thanks be to God you're here.
Coming from that man, you can't.
It was fantastic. It was fantastic, yeah. He knew exactly what he was doing too, you know.
I think, was your first major sporting gig in RT the 72 Olympics in Munich?
Yeah, the Munich Olympics,
Your current affairs background helped in that?
Well, it was, yeah,
Olympics
but the second, you see, Mick O'Hare and myself did the first week, and then he went to Munich. And I then became the main anchor in the second week, and of course the Munich disaster happened. And because of my current affairs background, it's an awful thing to say, but it was meat and drink to me. Like, and I did well in that, and then kind of established myself then as somebody who could do, you know, decent programming for sport. Because, like, previously what you were doing was kind of 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there, and doing the radio on Sundays, that kind of stuff. But that was kind of more definitive in terms of the way forward in television terms. And I was very lucky also. There were two terrific guys in there, Tim O'Connor, who subsequently became head of sport, and Mike Horgan, who was the number 2, and Fred Cogley, number 3. Fred became the head of sport after Mick O'Hare. They believed in me when nearly the whole station didn't at this stage, you know. And I was given jobs that normally other people might have had a certain reservation in giving me, and eventually that led to more and more stuff, and then that started my career as an anchor. I was actually asked to go in '78 to the World Cup in Argentina, and as a commentator, would you believe? Now, I'm hopeless in terms of names, hopeless. So I would have been a disastrous commentator. I remember actually one of the Olympics, I was really struggling with names, and I said, thanks be to God, I said, on air, here's a name I can pronounce. The winner of the high jump is Smirnov of Russia.
Was that a name?
I think I mispronounced it again. You know.
You have a great run presenting the Olympics on RT.
I did. I've done 10 Olympics over 44 years, would you believe? I missed 84, John Tracy's Olympics, in a sense, because I had a heart attack, and I watched that from my hospital bed. And that was the only one I missed. But I've enjoyed them. They've all been terrific. But this year I thought was a fantastic Olympics. The London Olympics were magnificent. Even though the performance, let's be honest about it, of the Irish Olympic team wasn't that good.
By our boxers,
the boxers were fantastic. We had Heffernan, the runner, the walker, did well. The girl from Dunleary in sailing, Annalise Murphy,
yeah,
she did. Yeah, but like the track and field did very poorly.
Were you like all men in Ireland? Did Katie Taylor make you cry?
And Katie Taylor, yeah. It was very interesting to watch Katie Taylor because I was watching it in Darren Maloney was the anchor because it was the afternoon, and I was watching it in the sports department, and the tension was unbelievable, and everybody felt that she had lost it. But there was one guy there.
The girl she was fighting.
Oh yeah, she thought she won it as well. But there was one fella there, and he was I can't remember who he was now, but he was a fellow who just came in for the Olympics. He wasn't a staff member or anything like that, but he was involved in sport somewhere else, in BBC Northern Ireland or somewhere like that. And he said, there's no question, he said, she's won it by 2 points. And she actually did win it by 2 points. He obviously knew his boxing. But one of the interesting things, that I always felt in the World Cup in 1990, when the penalty shootout took place in Genoa, I always regretted that they didn't come back to the studio, because people say to us we're very po-faced, or we're kind of killjoys, or we're party poopers or whatever, because we're too serious. We were dancing around the place, like, it was fantastic. And I always said, you should have come back and watched us, and you'd have seen the real supporters as against the forensic analysers. And they did it for Katie Taylor. They came back to the studio for Katie Taylor, because I've always been complaining about 1990. And you see the fellas, and they were crying, some of them. But it was a great occasion, because Katie meant so much to these boxers, you know, like it's a fantastic fraternity. And the boxers had so much to contribute in the way they processed the whole campaign. Like, you had a select group of boxers under a select group of coaches, and they went all over Europe to get experience, so they got better and better and better, and that's why they got the medals. And obviously, out of if boxing is to be replicated in track and field and things like that, we'd be much better off, because too many of the Irish athletes are no matter how good they are, they're training on their own, and they have their own coaches, and there's not a coordinated campaign, and I think that's what might happen for Rio. But I won't be around for Rio.
We'll touch on that before we finish up. I want to discuss now what people maybe kind of know you for in your soccer presenting. When was your first meeting with Amon Dunphy?
My first meeting with Amon was an interview I did down the line. It was I can't remember the year either. It was way back anyway. He was in Chile with the Irish team, and it was the time of Pinochet. He was very, very opposed to the Irish team going to Chile. But as John said, he was first on the plane when it came to going. So I did an interview down the line for a Sunday evening program I did, and he was astonished, because it was a current affairs interview. Like, I went after him very hard. He was expecting a kind of a soft, smarmy kind of a sports interview, which was very opposite. It was a political interview in a sense, about a sports one. And it started a bond between us of a relationship and respect. And to this day, like, it still exists. People say to me, how do you put up with him? He's a pussycat, I can tell you. He's a smashing fella to work with. He's the kind of a fella who will give you his last Rolo.
How good is he?
Do anything for you.
How good is he, though?
I call him in terms of analysts, he is the special one. He is the Jose Mourinho of analysts, because I tell you, he has the capacity to think way beyond the box. I mean, when Dunphy isn't on, the programme is duller.
I'll agree with you on that.
Because he has a view that is, I mean, in football terms, John is better than him. But in presentational terms, Dunphy is the best of any of the analysts, in my estimation, because he thinks outside the box. He comes up with far-fetched, like he was saying one time that really, like, from an Irish point of view, we needed a revolution. And he said, like, it's only when you have a dictator and people are on the streets that you'll actually get a good soccer team. And that's what he says it should happen in Ireland. He's a lovely fella, though.
Has there ever been a point on air where you've been like, in your head now, you wouldn't obviously say it on air, but has he gone a bit too far?
Oh, but I would say it if he went too far.
And you'd call,
that's
part of, that's maybe why it's so successful.
Yeah, but I always think we're like a repertory company in a way, because we all know our roles. And if I step out and pretend that I'm a football expert, he'll put me down publicly, as he has done. And he's told me no in certain terms. You're asked the questions, he said, you don't give the answers. That's true enough, I don't either.
He has a reputation of sometimes being controversial, rightly or wrongly.
He's less controversial than he was. He was very controversial at the start.
But does that take away from how good he is?
In some people's estimation, it does. That some people suggest that he's looking for notice. That's not him at all. He's not like that anymore. He may have been at one stage, but I don't think so. I think, you see, if you look at Roy Keane today, for instance, there'd be a kind of a certain resonance there, because Roy Keane, like, I don't know how many of you are Man United fans. I think Roy Keane was dead right in what he said in relation to the Real Madrid match. It was a foul. There's no question of it. It was dangerous play. And there's an argument to say that he saw that Nanny, wasn't it? Saw the guy coming. If you look back at that again, if you have it recorded, look at it again, and he glanced, and he still continued with the kick.
We'll have to disagree.
Well, you,
agree
yeah,
to disagree
fair
on
enough.
that
I know,
one.
I know
But
that. I
maybe
know that. But I'm saying,
maybe I'm biased.
of course you're biased. You're a Man United man, aren't you?
I am, of course.
But that's like, in a sense, that was Dunphy 20 years ago, you know. And Roy Keane is very much that as well. And he was the same. Like when it came to Saipan. I mean, Ferguson said to me that what happened in Saipan was the worst example of management he'd ever seen. He said how a manager can send home his top player a week before the World Cup, he said, is beyond comprehension, and especially the player who got you there.
Eamon brought John on board. It was him who...
He was, yeah.
He threatened to...
He was. And John actually thought, John was very unpopular when he was manager in terms of the media, because John wouldn't dream of saying anything against any of the players. He was very uncooperative. He was very, you know, he never said anything controversial at all. Therefore, the media had no time for him. So when he was suggested, see, myself and Eamon were working together for about 8 years, and we had no more to say really at that stage. And Eamon particularly, because he wanted to make a career as an analyst and a commentator, he wanted somebody else. And John, of course, he idolizes John, so John was the obvious person. But it was a really hard sell, because John's like persona in media terms was so bad that it took a huge amount of persuasion to get RT to agree to him coming on board. And when he came on board, he assumed it was just for the duration of the World Cup, and that was the end of it. But in fact, he was a huge hit from the word go, because John's analysis of matches is, I think, the best in any channel.
Were you ever intimidated by John when he came on board?
I was at the start, yeah, because like he was an iconic figure in soccer, you know, and of course, I mean, my soccer finished at schoolboy level with Croft and Celtic in Cork, so I was afraid of my life that I disgraced myself. But I found that John was very helpful, extremely helpful, and he would say to you during matches, I want to watch now. Like, for instance, I remember one that stuck in my mind. Watch how Jack Charlton protects Mick McCarthy. Watch how the whole defence of the Irish team is structured to make sure McCarthy is not caught for speed and not caught out of position. Like, and he'd show you how that, and he'd show you how fellas like your pal Carrick would be hiding from passes. And he would actually demonstrate to you certain things that he should be doing that he isn't doing. And I find John a fantastic companion watching a match. Really good and very, very generous.
What about Liam then? He's this kind of persona that he's straight-laced.
He is, but Liam actually has a very good sense of humour. But he doesn't suffer fools, and he regarded me as a fool when I suggested there was a disconnect between the Irish team.
Didn't like that.
And the Irish. Oh, he did not.
Now, was that because of your opinion, or because of his connection to Trapattoni?
Both. Like because I remember I was complaining that the Irish team were boring the arse off people, and therefore there was nobody going to the matches in relation to the numbers that should be going. And I said, look out the window of the Aviva, in the Aviva. And he said, and he leant across, and I thought I was going to get a dig or something. He said to me, this is not, he said, about football. This is about recession, and that's the reason the place is empty. No, it certainly is a contributing factor, but that's all.
Does it ever surprise you how popular, and no offence, sometimes unpopular, the panel is? Like during Italian 90, we touched on it a little earlier. You didn't go along with the public view.
No. We did, you see, because
that led to some unpopularity.
It did for Brady, or for Amon particularly. In fact, actually, when he came back, he went to Italy for a press conference, which Jack abandoned immediately when he saw him there. And he said he wouldn't have that press conference with that little Manny, I think he called him there. But the reality is, when he came back,
he got a lot of stick.
He got an awful, and not alone that, but his car was nearly turned over at Dublin Airport by a group of irate fans, you know, because people didn't at that stage see the distinction between actually enjoying the Irish performance, enjoying the fact that you were in the latter stages of the World Cup, and actually being honest in your appraisal. I think that's changed. Now people are much more, I mean, people much prefer. Like, I'll give you an example. If RT is covering, say, if RT is covering Ireland and Setanta are covering, or they wouldn't, but say Sky, or say BBC or ITV, I'll give you an idea of the figures. We would have somewhere in the region of 750,000 watching us, minimum. And depending on the importance of the match, it could be well over 1 million. Sky would be very lucky if they had 45,000. ITV, with Roy Keane, in an Irish match, would be very lucky if they had 70,000. BBC maybe 80 or 90,000. And that'd be it. That's the difference. And the reason is that like them or dislike the panel, the reality is they actually give it to you straight. They're not. I mean, Souness told me that when he joined the Irish panel, and he's not allowed now by Sky to be with us anymore. He wanted to be with us on Wednesdays, but Sky wouldn't allow it. He couldn't get over the honesty of the panel and the fact that we were as tough as we were, or as the lads were, in their comments. And he kind of, he was amazed at that. But he told me that the reasons were very simple in the cross-channel. The investment in the matches is huge, like billions as far as Sky is concerned. And a lot of the fellas who are on panels in the UK want to get back into the game, so they're not going to offend the clubs.
I'm interested now in your personal opinion. That surely is not right, and that's bad television.
What do you mean?
What's your personal opinion of the way that it's presented on Sky? Are you a fan?
I think since I think
too soft.
I said to Souness, I said when he was leaving, I said to him, I've enjoyed working with you immensely. I said, but I have to say one thing, you're very different with us than you are on Sky. And he said, my wife says the same thing. And I said, why don't you follow your wife? I said, and be much tougher. No, since he's got Gary Neville with him, the two of them are I think, excellent. They're producing much better comment than has been on with Jamie or people like that, which was much more bland. And they've got tougher on Sky. But I suppose it's easy for us to say it, like RT pays a lot of money by our standards in relation to the games, but it's different entirely when it comes to the huge investment in the UK.
You touched on Saipan a little there. Were you a fan of Mick McCarthy at the time?
Well, not in relation to Keane. I was, again, maybe the tribal Cork instinct came out in relation to Keane, but I think Keane was dead right, and I couldn't understand McCarthy's attitude for one very simple reason, that Keane had said everything to McCarthy's face, and then he spoke to Tom Humphreys, and Tom did a fantastic interview. And Tom didn't understand the significance of the interview because the sports editor of the Irish Times told me that when he got the interview, like, it was absolutely unbelievable. And within the Irish Times, it was actually only about 2 or 3 people knew of the actual interview, and it wasn't normally to be seen by everybody in advance. But it was so tough and so strong that he wouldn't allow anybody to see it until it actually went out. But I couldn't understand, if Mick McCarthy knew all that, why he had to actually demand that all the players and everybody else in the Irish squad who were there drinking, who were in a place that was actually a staging post for women being transferred from the Far East to Europe and, going into brothels in various places like that, who did no pitch, no footballs, no goalposts, a week before the World Cup. I mean, I don't understand how he created the situation for himself, but obviously there was tension between a lot of members of the team, because Keane would have been a very tough guy to deal with in a sense. But I remember Dennis Irwin saying to me, and I discovered it to be true subsequently when I got to know him a little bit. Dennis Irwin said to me, anybody who thinks that Keane is a party pooper doesn't know him at all. He is the best fun in the world. Now, that might come as something strange to some people, but apparently he is great fun. But he was going through a phase when he had been drinking a lot, and that phase of his life had ended. So he didn't necessarily want to be. He didn't want to be drinking with. Certainly didn't want to be with journalists at that stage. That
time led to a few heated discussions in the studio. John and Amon, I think, if I'm right saying, stopped speaking to each other for a while.
They did, but they did because John didn't agree with Amon's analysis of the situation. He felt that whatever Keane felt, he should have played, and then he should have made a song and dance after the World Cup was over. He shouldn't have done it in advance. But he was sent home, don't forget that. He didn't actually leave. He wanted to go home, but he was actually sent home by McCarthy. So that's important to put that in context. But because John didn't agree with Amon described him on the Late Show, I think it was, as an Uncle Tom. That went down like a lead balloon with him and his family. And it took a while before that but that's over and done with now.
Did that affect the show at the time, though?
Nothing. Funnily enough, they didn't speak at one stage for a year over Busby's book and John's analysis of the book. But you didn't see it on air because the head of sport wouldn't allow it. He said, if I see anything like that on air, you're gone. So they spoke on air, but they wouldn't speak off air. They'd come in, they'd speak to me, but they wouldn't speak to each other at all, except on air.
Now there's Trap. We've Trapattoni now.
Well, it's very interesting.
Your face says it all there, Bill, to be honest. You're critical of him
at this stage, yeah. I mean, you have to acknowledge that Trapp achieved what he set out to achieve. He He nearly made the World Cup playoffs. If he hadn't brought on McShane, he might have. Because, again, Roy Keane and our fellas agreed. Yeah. But Roy Keane was the first fella to say it publicly, that McShane was responsible for the goal because he didn't mark his man properly and allowed Henry to come in and be in a position to do what he did. But I think that, like, he nearly qualified for that World Cup. He did qualify for the Europeans, but I think his day is gone. Like, I think his stuff is sterile. We were disgraced in the European Championship was embarrassing, and I think he has no more to offer. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what kind of a reaction you get. Now, I think he won't last if we don't get at least 4 points from Sweden and Austria. I'd say he'll be gone.
He handles the players very poorly.
He does, yeah. He's a very
arrogant.
Huh?
We'd be here all night naming players who've had a fall.
Well, you could have a full team. But interestingly enough, and it may be very significant, the Evening Herald tonight has a huge half-page ad for the Ireland-Austria match, and that's a World Cup qualifier. That just shows that there is a disconnect.
Soccer has brought you some great memories, but there's one memory that I want to touch on. It's probably not a great one. It was the '95 riots between England and Ireland.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was very personal for me because my daughter Sally was a great soccer follower and sports follower. She was actually captain of the Irish swimming team for years as well. She's big into sport, and she loved soccer and she loved following Ireland. She went to that match. I got her tickets and she went, but I had no idea where she was on the ground. So when I was watching the rioting, I said, Mother of God, I hope she, because I knew there were good seats, but I didn't know where they were. I hope to God she wasn't in the middle of it. And eventually I had to tell the audience that Sally was there, my daughter. And if anybody who knew her, would they look after her? And there was a fella there called Kelly who used to work with me in the old days, and he saw her there, and he looked after her, brought her back to the studio. She was raging because she wanted to see the whole drama in full. You know, she didn't want to be rescued at all.
Finally, Bill, what's the future hold for you with RTE?
Well, I'm in my last contract. I'm not doing any more. I told them I didn't want to do the Olympics anymore because I had done 10. And the next Olympics will be that I usually do the primetime programme, and that'll be in the middle of the night or 2 o'clock in the morning or something, so no thank you. So that's the end of that. And we agreed that I will retire from my current job after the World Cup, if God spares me my health, after the World Cup final in Rio. And July next year.
Is that's Bill O Herlihy finished in sports broadcasting? Or
well, it's finished. Finished in the sense that if I do anything, it might be occasional interviews or something like that. But I won't be doing anchoring any more events like I have been.
Bill, I could talk to you all night. It's been a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill O Herlihy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks for joining us here in Ballyfermot College this evening to close the show this evening with his latest video, Kitty Song, Ballyfermot College's very own Kevin Curdock Murphy.
I was born north of the river in a house down by the shore. In that house I took my first breath, and I've been coming back for more. And you held me as a hero, and you wrapped me from the cold, and you kissed me on my forehead, and you gave me all your gold. And you told me when those bullets fly, don't hide behind that wall. Come out with all guns blazing, son, and always give your all. Always give your all. I loved all of your stories, and I loved all of your songs. I loved the way that you loved me, didn't have you here for long. You told me go your own way, boy, and follow with no crowd. Wear your heart upon your sleeve and speak your truth out loud. Speak your truth out loud. Still can hear you singing, girl. Still can smell your smoke. And I can taste your gin and tonic. I still laugh at all your jokes. And even though you are long gone, you live inside inside my heart. Don't think that it is possible for you and me to part. And you held me as a hero, and you wrapped me from the cold, and you kissed me on my forehead, and you gave me all your gold. And you told me when those bullets fly, don't hide behind that wall. Come out with all guns blazing, son, and always give your all. Always give your all. I hope that you can hear this song, 'cause it is all for you. I hope it makes you proud of me, like I am proud of you. And you gave me strength and honor, and you had so much to spare. I breathe in all your courage, and I breathe out all my fears. And you held me as a hero, and you wrapped me from the cold, and you kissed me on my forehead, and you gave me all your gold. And you told me when those bullets fly, don't hide behind that wall. Come out with all guns blazing, son, and always give your all. Always give your all. I was born north of the river, in a house down by the shore. In that house I took my first breath, and I've been coming back for more. And I've been coming back for more. And I've been coming back for more.